Star Wars Andor has been a show filled to the brim with surprises. Not normal TV show surprises like, whoa, can you believe Rick shaved this episode? But rather surprises regarding the quality of the show itself. It was surprising to see the show committed to being as gritty and smart as creator Tony Gilroy's previous work. It was surprising that a show about Cassian Andor seemingly had better production value than one about Obi-Wan Kenobi. It was surprising that the show avoided cheap fan service, instead opting to tell its own extremely compelling story. Overall, the show's caliber is almost a shock itself considering Disney Plus's previous swings at Star Wars content. Before Andor, a Disney Plus Star Wars show could be, at best, like The Mandalorian. A fun, half-hour ball of fluff with enough interesting ideas to last its 30-minute runtime. At worst, a show could end up like The Book of Boba Fett, which was so lazy and underwhelming that the only 2 episodes of the show that received any sort of attention didn't include the title character at all. And of course, we shouldn't forget about Kenobi, even though no one would blame us if we did. Looking back, I honestly think Kenobi is one of the biggest fumbles in pop culture history. One so large, in fact, that it requires a little bit of background to dissect. This section actually ended up being super long, so sorry about that. In 2016, Rogue One: A Star Wars Story was released, the second Star Wars property made under the Disney umbrella, and the first live-action spin-off of the franchise to be released theatrically. Originally directed by Gareth Edwards, the final cut of the film included a large number of reshoots by Tony Gilroy, director of the Jason Bourne trilogy. Despite the stigma surrounding films with reshoots this crucial, Rogue One remained mostly intact and to this day still has some fanatics praising it as their favorite entry in the series. After Rogue One made over $1 billion at the box office, Disney began to move forward with their next 2 spin-offs, Solo: A Star Wars Story and an untitled Obi-Wan Kenobi film. Solo was found to be in desperate need of intense reshoots after it had nearly finished production and, in a nearly unprecedented turn of events, fan-favorite directors Phil Lord and Chris Miller were fired and replaced with Ron Howard. Under Disney's supervision, Howard completely reworked the script, which led to the film essentially being shot in full twice. What released on May 10th of 2018 contained virtually nothing from the original shoot. However, this wasn't actually Solo's biggest problem. The release date of May 10th had Solo sandwiched between the April 27th release of Avengers: Infinity War and the May 18th release of Deadpool 2. And while the latter 2 films saw lucrative success, Solo was left to bomb, losing Lucasfilm and Disney about $77 million. Instead of realizing that releasing a spin-off that nobody asked for in between 2 of the biggest superhero movies of the year was a terrible idea, Disney instead believed that Star Wars spin-offs simply weren't meant for the big screen. Thus, the planned Obi-Wan film script had to be stretched out from a roughly 2-hour project to a 6-hour series. As if that wasn't enough, Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni found the premise of Kenobi to be far too similar to The Mandalorian, which had risen in popularity after its first season. Kathleen Kennedy also expressed concern over Deborah Chow's vision for a darker character study of Obi-Wan, and wanted the scripts to have a more uplifting tone. Chow would state that, "You can't just wave the magic wand with any writer and arrive at a story that necessarily reflects what you want to feel." Unfortunately for Chow, the decision had already been made and a new team of writers was brought on. This whole fiasco led to rumors of the show being cancelled. Obviously, this wasn't the case, and the show released to, criticism. The enlargement of the initial story caused noticeably bad pacing issues, and the lighter tone heavily conflicted with the dark mental state of Kenobi himself. In the end, Kenobi delivered an inconsequential narrative with as many controversial retcons as clunky fight scenes. Andor was announced in December of 2020 to a resounding, "What? Cassian Andor? Cassian Andor? Out of all the characters in the Star Wars universe, Cassian Andor? It takes a die-hard Star Wars fan to even remember who this guy is, and even those few struggle to name a single personality trait he holds." All in all, most of the discourse surrounding Andor boiled down to the anticipation of failure. After Tony Gilroy was brought onto the series, along with his brother Dan, he urged the writers to set aside their nostalgia for the original Star Wars films, recognizing that the pandering nature of fan service has ultimately been a detrimental aspect of the Disney-era Lucasfilm content thus far. Diego Luna was also brought on as an executive producer in addition to being the show's star. He expressed interest in exploring the character of Cassian Andor. This combination of admitting past faults and focusing on character development led to the scripts for Andor being the inverse of what people actually expected them to be. For the production of The Mandalorian, a 21-foot tall, 75-foot wide, 360-degree semicircular wall of LED screens was used to create digital sets with the illusion of tangibility. This allowed for a shocking amount of the show to be captured in camera, with little post-production green screen tinkering required. This proved especially helpful since the Mandalorian's costume is so reflective that any green screen used would have to be painted out in post frame by frame, an issue once seen firsthand by George Lucas during the production of Revenge of the Sith.
Except you reflect also the crew and the camera and everything else on the Mars.
Folks, we need to clear the set, please. We've got a lot of reflection problems on C-3PO.
Dubbed the Volume, this digital set was also praised as a cost-cutting marvel, since pre-rendered backgrounds could be displayed in studio, completely getting rid of the need to shoot on location. The technology was later used on Boba Fett, Kenobi, and even the theatrically released Thor: Love and Thunder. However, it wasn't without its downsides. Unless extremely in-depth planning took place, scenes had to be largely static, since both the actors and the camera operators were really limited in where they could actually move. When the care was taken to plan out dynamic shots, like the long take in the Book of Boba Fett, this technique was a godsend for productivity and flair. But in the case of Thor, a production that leaned too far into improvisation to properly plan out scenes like this, it became abundantly clear that the characters were all just standing around in a small room, completely breaking the immersion of the audience. The creative minds behind Andor wisely decided to not utilize the volume at all, instead staying true to old school filmmaking techniques. And green screen, obviously. Cassian's homeworld, Ferrix, was built on a backlot rather than a soundstage, allowing for more dynamic shots and natural lighting. In total, around 4 full city blocks of Ferrix were constructed with working doors, windows, and full building interiors. And while this may seem excessive, I understand why this route was preferable to the volume. You see, Ferrix isn't like other Star Wars locations. Every planet visited in The Rise of Skywalker, for example, despite being populated by dozens of extras, felt hollow. They're fine now! Most Star Wars planets are simply backdrops for the story to take place. Like any information we know about Corellia from Solo was provided from supplementary material or Wikipedia, not from the movie itself. It only exists because the characters are there. But Ferrix is a character in and of itself. The set designers did a great job making these streets feel lived in and full, which is important considering how often the show cuts back to the subplot here. Ferrix isn't the only example of great world building though. Narkina 5 and Niamos both continue the show's commitment to practical set design. Not to mention Coruscant finally returns to live action after 17 years, and it's never felt worse. This is clearly no longer the bustling utopia that we saw in the prequels. After years of being the capital of the Empire, Coruscant has had all life drained from it. And all that's left is the bland and the mundane. It's awesome. I personally believe that the fall from grace of a well-known planet does a lot to make the audience feel the importance of the rebel cause. I mean, we already know the conflict. We already know the outcome. Hell, we already know what happens to Cassian Andor, so why should we care? We care because we are subtly shown the effects that the Imperial dictatorship has on so many worlds, which is infinitely more effective than, what if Darth Vader was walking down the street and he just snaps a lady's neck because he's so evil? It is genuinely a little concerning how much better the character work is here than in any of the other Star Wars movies or shows. Not just the sequels, not just the prequels, all of them. Now, I will admit, Andor himself is basically just given the Han Solo arc. Like, he doesn't care at the beginning, but then he does care, and that's nice. But with 12 episodes to breathe, the development feels so real and the emotions so raw thanks to Diego Luna. Han Solo's arc in A New Hope fits well with the movie's emphasis on the fantasy part of sci-fi fantasy. He came back at the end because of the importance of friendship. That's so sweet. But Andor's arc here is much more akin to something that we may experience in the real world. He lives in ignorance of other people's problems because they don't directly affect him. It's only when he meets members of this marginalized group that he sees the importance of the movement. His confession that he's getting paid for the heist on Aldhani is special not just because he's revealing this information so they can all trust each other. He's unloading a real burden, because only now is he beginning to see the importance of what they're doing. As a show with his name in the title probably should, Andor really made me love Andor. Now, let's talk about Stellan Skarsgård. Stellan Skarsgård. What more can be said about this man? He was really the best part of the already outstanding film Dune. I mean, come on.
I said I would not harm them, and I shall not. But Arrakis is Arrakis. And the desert takes the weak.
He's so cool. And in Andor, he just becomes one of the most interesting characters in the whole franchise. The orchestrator of the Rebel Alliance hiding in plain sight, putting on a mask every day. Every scene with him is just so interesting. And just try telling me that this isn't the best monologue Star Wars has ever had.
I'm condemned to use the tools of my enemy. I burn my decency for someone else's future. I burn my life to make a sunrise that I know I'll never see. So what do I sacrifice? Everything!
Lastly, I need to talk about Genevieve O'Reilly's Mon Mothma. She was originally cast in the role all the way back in 2004 for an appearance in Revenge of the Sith, where Padme, Jimmy Smits, and herself would basically found the rebellion over the course of like a minute and a half. This scene would ultimately get cut, but her casting would be resurrected in Rogue One. Even though she did get to once again share a scene with Jimmy Smits, she still didn't have a whole lot to do. But in Andor, she effectively turns a glorified Return of the Jedi background character into one of the most interesting people we've seen in the universe so far. Obviously, I don't want to give anything away, but her scenes here are just so well written, directed, and acted that they seem like they could be ripped from a full-fledged political thriller. I mean, who would have thought that the most compelling scenes in a Disney Plus Star Wars show would be about, like, embezzling funds? It's insane. But every scene with her is just an absolute joy to watch. All the other characters are superbly acted as well, with the standout for the smaller roles being Andy Serkis as Kino Loy. I love this continuation of Andy Serkis getting live action roles, because even though his work in motion capture is undoubtedly outstanding, I really do think he has such a good screen presence without a GoPro mounted on his face. All in all, everything about this show just feels so grand and refreshing in comparison to what came before it. I mean, I personally enjoy most of the Disney Plus content like the little consumer boy I am, but this show is just on a whole other level. It honestly has a level of quality that has so far been unseen for these productions, and I'm so happy that Season 2 is coming. All I really have left to say is go watch Andor and see for yourself. If you have seen it, let me know what you think about it in the comments, and maybe, hopefully, consider subscribing if you want to see more content like this. But that's all I got. See ya.